very challenging because it makes us and students constantly have to rethink the way they think. It keeps pulling the rug from under our feet, as it were, so that we have to, it makes us stop taking for granted, or make us realize that we take for granted a lot of things. In a sense, the first basic question of literary theory is, what is literature? And it sounds such a basic and obvious question. We all think we know what literature is, and as soon as I ask that question, we come up with 15, 20 different answers, and at the end of that discussion we're nowhere knowing exactly what literature is. And the moment you start trying to define something, you have to consider the relationship between literature and other forms of writing, of thinking, of figure in the world. So students are encouraged to develop not just the content of, it's not just a content that is being discussed, it's ways of thinking about what they think they know how to think about. And that can be very challenging. So what I try to do is sometimes start from easier questions and then build on those to develop our incrementally get to more difficult points, more difficult questions. But very often also the structure of the course as a whole involves throwing them in at the deep end from the start. And I keep throwing ropes at them and floats and things to hang on to. But it's, in a sense, realizing the difficulty of what we do is part of the pedagogy of it, the ways of understanding how some of these questions really are difficult. And my idea is that if we find something difficult, it is because we don't know yet how to think about it. So I'm not so much interested in conveying content, of course that's also there, but learning how to think differently. And, you know, if we start from easy bits and then we build on, it's very reassuring. So there has to be some of that as well. But if you start from a really difficult question and slowly get there, then it's the sense of achievement at the end is also much bigger. It's like, you know, you look at a really, really high mountain, and then it's a hard slog to get there, and sometimes I have to push, and sometimes I have to pull, and sometimes I just cheer from the side. But when the students get there and they look back at how far they've gone, there is a really strong sense of achievement that I think is part of the learning process, feeling that you have got somewhere. And I want the discussion and this learning not to be me telling them what to think and how to think, but students getting there through their own thinking, but also through the seminar collective thinking. So one of the things I keep telling them is think aloud. And if you don't know where you're going with that thought, it doesn't really matter. Just put it in the middle of the room and let's put all our thoughts there, and then let's see how we can put them together to see how we can collectively get to a place that we didn't know we already could get to, but we get in that theory the first years.
Okay.
So I don't have a lot of experience of that, although I don't think we do it enough, perhaps, because when we get, my students on literature in question are third-year students, and they have read, The Death of the Author, Bertolt Brecht. They have learned different approaches, theoretical approaches to literature, for example, in approaches to text, and they know how to apply them to texts. What I'm interested in is, in a sense, a step beyond that. Applying theory to text is like applying a grid that makes you see the text in a certain way and understand the relationships between different parts. And that's useful, it's a very necessary skill. What I'm interested in is also students looking at the text itself, answering back and challenging the theory, and the dialogue that is established between the literary text and the theoretical text, so that you start looking at the literary text as asking questions, and you having to ask different questions to it, and the theory as a form of literature as well, which is composed in a certain way, uses language and conventions in a certain way. And I find that students haven't really got that kind of, they haven't learned to think about text and theory in that way until they come to the third year. Yes, I mean, one of the topics that we consider, that we look at fairly early on in the course is the relationship between literature and science. And one of the main questions that comes up is, we assume that science is fact-based. It tells us objective facts, if not truths. And if, but the language that science uses and the language that literature uses is the same. The language, in our case, we use English. Why do we assume that literature uses language in a different way from science? So we look at not so much scientific texts as history and philosophy of science, and we look at how they are constructed, and then we compare it to a novel. For example, one of the novels that we consider is Dr. Copernicus by John Banville, and they both construct the images, models, theories of the world and how it functions, and the novel then looks at the way science needs imagination as well. We are very comfortable with the idea that imagination is necessary to literary texts, is part of literary texts. But what is the role of imagination in scientific writing? And that's the question that the novel throws back at us, and at the theory of how scientific theories develop and evolve, for example.
Great. General questions now. Positive aspects of teaching in ECL. What do we do well in ECL, teaching-wise? We're rarely rewarded for it all.
I think teaching in ECL is fantastic because we have a great mix of students, but also a great mix of tutors, of staff. We all come from quite different backgrounds, approaches, schools of criticism, and I think the mix is great, and we complement each other extremely well. And there's also a very relaxed atmosphere, I think, generally speaking, including in classrooms. So that makes for a much better learning experience for all of us. I mean, teaching experience and learning experience for students as well. I think one of the main challenges is that students are getting used more quickly than we are to different texts, forms of writing and of texts like blogs and Twitter and texting. And maybe I don't want this to sound negative, but this attention span is getting shorter, and we're still relying very much on the long text in the academic essay and the formal academic traditional essay and the exam. And that's all very important precisely because there are different forms of texts that students are more used to. It's important to remind them and develop the skills to deal with the literary text, the longer text, and the academic essay. But maybe one of the things we should think about is to encourage different ways of writing and thinking and criticizing texts and the type of texts that we look at. And also there's increasingly more teamwork that is necessary in the world of work. So maybe we're not thinking enough about how to help students develop teamwork, and also assessing teamwork. That's a big challenge because you have to assess the individual student, and how do you assess the individual contribution to teamwork? We need to probably learn ourselves how to teach students to contribute to a team, make sure that their contribution is valued by the other team members and it's recognized without talking over other students, and learn to listen to others and ourselves learn how to develop that and assess that as well. Sometimes I feel that the format of the seminar is in many ways it's ideal, and we have this, we vary with lectures and seminars or 2-hour seminars. I think we may encourage more small group independent work, like teamwork, that then can come back and report back to seminars, so that we're always very worried about the number of contact hours, but contact doesn't need to always have us there. Students can actually do quite a lot of the work and then report back to us in small groups, pairs, sometimes it can be larger groups, and debate text further and then bring their ideas back to seminars, so we can increase the number of contact hours of the students among themselves, which is in some ways monitored, because the group then has to come back to the whole seminar with the tutor present. We may want to develop more blog type or forum type of discussion between students, because some students feel more comfortable, you know, behind a keyboard rather than speaking in front of larger groups. So we may try to encourage that kind of contribution to develop their own thinking and their learning on the subjects that we choose, but sometimes it's very valuable. The students feel that they're choosing what to focus on as well.
Okay.